all over the Western world, supposedly democratic governments seem to be dismantling their own institutions rather than end their complicity in an involvement with Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip. Peaceful protests of all kind are being repressed. Students are being deported or arrested without charge or warrant. Journalists are being raided. And a major factor in this has been the Israel lobby and how it is abusing the legal systems of the West to attack, ban, and criminalize even the smallest expression of solidarity with the Palestinians. But things are not all bleak. Lawyers of conscience are using their skills to defend Palestinians and their supporters. And joining us here today on the live stream to discuss all of this is one of those lawyers working inside the UK legal system. Franck Magennis is a barrister with Garden Court Chambers and a member of the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. His work focuses on challenging rights breaches by the British and other states, employers and landlords. He's got expertise in legal claims connected to Palestinian emancipation from Israeli occupation. Franck, thanks for joining us on the live stream today.
𝐿𝐿, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So good to have you. Well, let's jump in. There's so much going on in terms of fighting repression to protect, the civil rights of people expressing their disgust with this genocide that is being financed and politically abetted by the West. Last month in Germany, the German government ordered 4 students with foreign citizenships, 2 Irish, 1 Pole, and 1 American, to leave the country. The rationale was that they had attended protests on campus against the Gaza genocide. This, of course, followed the Trump administration in the US ordering immigration police to effectively kidnap without warrant several leaders of student protests from US campuses. What does it say about the climate of repression in Europe that some European states have acted so incredibly fanatically in defense of Israel's genocide?
Well, look, what I would say is that Israel is collapsing and Zionism, its animating ideology, is in a terminal crisis. And so what we see is these kind of morbid symptoms. As the racist colonial ideology of Zionism collapses before our eyes, and if you want to, I can sort of get into details, but your viewers will be familiar with the details, right? It's very obvious to anyone paying attention. Even liberal institutions like the ICJ have had to admit it's an apartheid state, which means it's engaged in racial domination, and even EU countries are accusing the Zionist entity of genocide, right? So that's why I say that it's a terminal crisis, right? That's not my hope or my fantasy. That's just my dispassionate assessment of what's happening. I don't see how it's possible for the Zionist entity to come back from this damage that it's done to its own reputation through its own actions, all right? So we have all of these morbid symptoms of a dead ideology, a dying ideology that's in its kind of death rattle. And it's predictable. There's a sort of, you might call a spectrum of nation states around the world that have responded to the crisis of Zionism in different ways. At one end of that spectrum, you might point to a country like Yemen and Ansar Allah, who have frankly shamed the rest of the world by their willingness to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians at this very dark hour for them, right? Taking real material sacrifices to militarily confront the Zionist entity and to show solidarity, to open up a front in the struggle against Zionism. And then you pass through that spectrum. Countries like South Africa, of course, have done very useful stuff, and their foreign minister is saying, if you are a dual Israeli national who served in that colonial military, you come back to this country, we will arrest you, right? That's what the South African foreign minister said. And then, that takes us to the sort of European end of the spectrum, so to speak. And it's perhaps unsurprising that Ireland is at the good end of that European spectrum, right? Irish people, the sort of colonized white people, right? So Irish people have this experience of being colonized. And the Irish government, I'm not here to uncritically endorse it. It's I noticed that Palestine Action ERA has just emerged on the scene, right? It's clear that the Irish government is complicit in this genocide. I'm not here to give them some carte blanche, right? They are on the Zionist end of the spectrum as far as I'm concerned, but they have at least done something, right? They've joined the genocide case. There's a debate in the Dáil at the moment about banning goods. And then we come to the sort of terrible, extremely and openly racist end of the spectrum, where we find countries, nation states like Germany and the United States, and indeed Britain, okay? I obviously practice in England and Wales. That's what I'm most familiar with. The situation in England, obviously the British government is a staunch supporter of its little loyal Jewish Ulster, has been for literally hundreds of years. But Germany is predictably absolutely terrible on this issue. It's an extremely narcissistic place, right? Full of German people trying to process their guilt at the fact that they engaged in a mass murder of Jews and communists and disabled people in the Holocaust, and sort of bizarrely using that as justification for their endorsement of yet another genocide. So the received wisdom seems to be not as a matter of law, but as a matter of politics, that it's perhaps unsurprising, but no less disgusting that the Germans think they have anything to tell anyone about how to resist a genocide, right? And I should say, I think it's important not to homogenize Germans, right? There are many Germans during the Holocaust who gave their lives to fight the Nazis, right? Anyone is free to choose the correct position. Any German person, any British person, Yemeni person, whoever you might be, you can choose to reject Zionism. You can choose to set your face against this fascist ideology and do whatever you can to stand up against it. And that brings me to the legal matter that you're talking about. It's yet another morbid symptom, right? These so-called liberal democracies find themselves having to chew through their own human rights laws, their own liberal safeguards, their legal safeguards. And so we find ourselves in the absurd position where people who haven't even committed a crime, they don't even stand accused of transgressing any of Germany's unreconstructed criminal laws. It's just that they had the courage to take some kind of action. I think it was at a university, to do something to stand up and be counted and to oppose Zionism at a moment when it is enacting a genocide. And for that reason, the Germans are trying the German state, I should say, is trying to deport these people. I've been in touch with various lawyers in Germany, and they have a problem that's not that dissimilar to what we have in Britain, but there it's even more pronounced, which is that there is a lack of anti-Zionist lawyers. There's a lack of lawyers who are willing to go into court and state what are by this point incredibly obvious facts about Israel, so-called, and its racist governing ideology, right? It's not difficult to do it. I've been doing it myself in various English courts and tribunals. But what's necessary is for people to exercise a bit of samud, as the Palestinians would say, just be steadfast, principled, humble, but robust. Go into court and say the obvious quiet part loud. So
yeah, and just to butt in a little bit there, Frank, I've actually watched you do that in a court hearing myself, albeit in a Zoom, and I have to say, one of the cross examinations I saw you do was one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen. Like you, I don't know if I can get into the case specifically, but you was very strongly challenging a so-called expert witness for the pro-Zionist side, and you were doing it openly. You were very openly expressing your own politics and your own analysis, and at the same time challenging them on the facts. And I think that's an example of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I remember the case you're talking about. We're still waiting for a judgment in that case, but that's sort of my practice now. Like that was July last year, the trial in that case. I won't comment on it because we're still waiting for judgment. But broadly, cross-examining people, advancing arguments about Zionism, I would push back slightly, just a matter of my professional reputation. I don't think I was advancing my politics, right? That's my point. My clients were anti-Zionists, and they asked me to advance their case in a particular way, and that's what I, as a lawyer, am asked to do. It's not for me to put my politics at the front and the center. It's my job to actually advance the case and the arguments of my clients. And what all too often happens is liberals who
will impose the liberal politics on the activists.
Yep. Yeah. And all I've been doing in these cases where I have to cross-examine Zionist witnesses, Zionist experts, all I do is I state, that's the joy of cross-examination, is you get to sort of say a statement and put it to someone in the form of a question. You just say, well, you're a Zionist, is that right? All right, well, Zionism is the official ideology of the state of Israel. That must be right. And Israel's governed by an apartheid regime. That's obviously right. An apartheid regime is racial domination. So it follows that if you're a Zionist, you must be in favor of the ideology which, as a matter of fact, is currently enacting racial domination against Palestinians. And you're also, these Zionist witnesses are interested in maintaining a demographic majority for Jews, and they view non-Jews as a demographic threat. So you just say all of this stuff to them.
But they're so not used to hearing that. They're used to deference.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think, I'm not trying to put my identity at the center of the picture here, but I think the fact that I come from South Armagh, the fact that I come from Britain's oldest colony, like we don't take lectures from the British Empire about how to resist colonialism, where it come from. We fight the British Empire. We have hundreds of years of history of fighting the British Empire. And I think that's part of what's happening is these British judges are extremely complacent. They're used to thinking of Irish Republican liberation movement, of other liberation movements as being these kind of cartoonish, two-dimensional evil characters who just hate Britain and her civilized laws or whatever. And they've just turned us into these parodies of ourselves. And when they actually meet us in flesh and blood, we're like, hey man, like, I'm just some guy. I don't have all the answers, but it seems like you're very, very racist and you always have been. Do you have any basis for disagreeing with that? And they've never been told that. Like, hey, your judges and your witnesses and your people in the belly of one of the most violently racist empires in human history. And it isn't just that, I'm really clear that it's not just that Israel is in crisis and Zionism is in crisis. It's that the global political order that allows for this kind of mass murder of people because of their race in order to propagate a little loyal Jewish Ulster to advance now mostly American and NATO interests in the region. We have to tear down the entire system that allowed this, that allowed Zionism to do this to Palestinians. And so, in my opinion, the crisis of Zionism is a crisis of global imperial capitalist hegemony, certainly US hegemony. It seems as though the US empire is in crisis, and you see that across various theaters, of which Palestine is only one. And so we must, I mean, I don't need to tell you on this stream, like, we mustn't be complacent. Zionism is in crisis, but we must ensure that we make this the terminal crisis of Zionism by continuing to diligently confront Zionism wherever we can. And in my case, that means going into court and saying with all humility, but without flinching and without compromising on what my clients want me to say, that Zionism is a racist ideology. It's the ideology of an apartheid regime that's committing a genocide. It views Palestinians as a racial threat to the demographic purity of its desired ethno-state. And any human with a conscience, and certainly any judge imposing any law that claims to take human rights and anti-racism seriously, needs to acknowledge that in their actions and their judgments. It's not that difficult. And I hope that we can increase the capacity. There are some formidable lawyers in Germany doing really vital work about this issue. I know Alexander 𝐓𝐿 personally. He's a friend of mine, a formidable lawyer. He's got staunch anti-Zionist politics, and he just goes into court and like some of us in Britain and a growing number of lawyers are just, it's not that difficult to go in and say the quiet part loud. So hopefully that's what will happen in this case. Yeah. Just if and when it comes to court, that they'll be represented by good lawyers who just say, hold on a second, what? You're deporting Irish people to Ireland because they correctly suggested that the German state is engaged in yet another genocide.
Yeah, well, if we could move on a little bit to Britain, as you mentioned, the British government itself, the British state, has acted incredibly fanatically in the protection of Israel. And we've seen the repression of direct action groups like Palestine Action, with many even being tarred with trumped up terrorism allegations or insinuations or associations, put in solitary confinement. Activists and journalists have been raided and repressed, including myself, of course, in October of last year when my home was raided by counter-terror police and all my journalistic devices seized. And most recently, of course, we've seen the Irish rap band 𝐓𝐡𝐞, one of their members, being charged with a terror-related offence. And there's a whole host of these things happening. Why do you think the British, I mean, you've touched on it, but why do you think the British state, even under the Labour government, or especially under the Labour government, has played a role during this genocide, second only to Germany in its fanatical devotion to Israel?
Well, some historical context is important here, right? For hundreds of years, literally, I mean, Andreas Malm's pamphlet, The Destruction of Palestine is the Destruction of the Earth, is really good on this stuff, right? He talks about how the British Navy mechanized its navy and added steam power in 1840 and then bombed Acre, right, in Palestine on the Mediterranean coast, and then sort of chased the Ottoman army down the Mediterranean Sea and the Mediterranean coast of and so that's 1840. And then he talks about how at that stage, British statespeople and British polite society was talking about this fantasy of a Jewish colony. And then the more well-known date, of course, is 1917, which is the Balfour Declaration. And then, of course, there's the mandate. So Britain is literally the occupier and the colonial occupier of Palestine. And I just think, as someone familiar with the Irish struggle, right, it's through the Irish struggle that I came to the Palestinian struggle. I know that most people, and I'm not trying to generalize too much, but a lot of people certainly in the British establishment have extremely short memories, and they're very complacent about thinking about the extent to which this is Britain's doing. Britain is responsible for this crisis in Palestine, right? It's responsible for the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. It's responsible for giving space to the idea that there should be this ethno-state in Palestine, right? So that's the historical context. And then contemporary British policy continues to be staunchly Zionist. I personally feel relatively hopeful about this. My perspective is limited. I'm just one person. What do I know, right? But from where I'm standing, I really think Zionism is collapsing. I think that if we're diligent, if we're humble, but like if we really make the efforts to get organized and keep pushing back against this fascist ideology, that it is in the stage of collapsing. I think that you have opposition Israeli ministers saying, hold on, I think we might be a pariah state now. And you know, all the other things that I've listed, I could go on, right? There's all of these morbid symptoms. Seems like Zionism is collapsing. And the key strategic decision then for people in a country like Britain is, do we acknowledge the extent to which the Zionist entity was only allowed to exist for this long because of countries like Britain and the US, and therefore suggest that, look, the crisis of Zionism is a crisis of British imperial hegemony, it's a crisis of US imperial hegemony? Or do we sort of try to allow the imperialists in countries like Britain to cut off the gangrene infected leg, right? The Zionism infected leg, if you will. Do we allow them to cut off the limb to save the imperialist beast, the body of the imperialist beast? I'm sorry if that's a crass metaphor, given how many people in Palestine are actually having to lose their limbs. But you follow what I'm saying, right? I think that some people focus on the Zionist entity and they lose sight of the extent to which the British Empire is directly implicated in this genocide, right? Various journalists, right? Matt Kennard has talked a lot about the surveillance flights that the British state is running from its Cyprus military base. There's an ongoing judicial review, of course, in this country, challenging the British state's continued arms sales. And it's unraveling. You can see that the way the heat is coming. David Lammy seems to be personally implicated in this, right? The allegations against him are mounting. Keir Starmer is certainly personally implicated, right? Obviously, the allegation against him is that he committed a war crime on camera. So the chickens are coming home to roost, so to speak. So we know the British state is a staunch ally of the Zionist entity. And that is why when Zionism enters into crisis, the British state has to increase its repression of anyone who tries to land a blow on Zionism, because Zionism is so weak right now, it's collapsing. Like the territory on which the Zionists are standing, literally and metaphorically, is collapsing. And so the British state is like, hold on, trying to play this rearguard action. And they're not used to being on the back foot like this. And that registers practically, sort of in the way that you said when you were talking about the cross-examination of that Zionist witness in that case, right? I feel as though a lot of people who, maybe they say they're on the left, maybe they say they're pro-Palestinian, they haven't got the memo. It's open season on the ideology of Zionism. It's not capable of defending itself, right? And so all we should do is go into whatever forum we have access to, whether that's just talking to your relatives or talking to your trade union, talking to your colleagues at work, or if you're a lawyer, going into court and making arguments, talking to your clients about it, and then seeing how they want to run their case, and then go into court and just say, hey, this is a terminal crisis. There's morbid symptoms everywhere. And that brings me to the specific point you raised about journalists. The work that you're doing is absolutely vital. I'm a massive admirer of your platform, always have been. Like it's almost 15 years. I'm getting old now. It's going on 2 decades that I've been involved in the Palestine solidarity struggle. And Electronic Intifada has always been there as this formidable resource. The blows that you are landing, the blows that other anti-Zionists are landing against the fascist ideology of Zionism and its apartheid state are doing so much damage that they have to increase these repressive mechanisms, because the words that come out of your mouth, merely reporting on the facts of what is happening on the ground, are doing so much damage that is why they have to try and repress you. I'm sorry for the way that you were personally treated. It's an outrage, but it's in some ways quite a hopeful sign that journalists doing their job in the formidable way that you and many Palestinian journalists, of course, have done their job. There's a reason why the Zionists attack journalists in Gaza. It's because it's a live stream genocide, and the way that Palestinians have turned the figure of the journalist, as among many other figures, into this hero, it's so moving. Like to have to be asked to document your own genocide, and yet that is exactly what they have done. How the Palestinians teach us dignity, how they teach us what it means to be a journalist, what it means to be a lawyer, right? One of the cases we're going to come to involves this guy, Raji Sourani. I'll come to that. Raji Sourani is a formidable lawyer, right? He's one of the guys who, before I became a lawyer, made me want to be a lawyer. I remember he came to speak in London 15 years ago, and he talked about all of the cases that he was losing, right? He said, we brought close to 2,000 cases and we've won 19. That's like less than 1% success rate. And someone said, why do you do it? Why do you bring cases when you know you're going to lose? And he said, I don't want the Zionists to be able to pretend that they didn't know what they were doing to us. When the reckoning comes, I want their own courts to have had all of the records necessary to see that what they were doing to us was a racist colonial project. I'm paraphrasing, you understand. But the Palestinians teach us what it means to be human. They teach us the meaning of dignity. And I'm not putting them on a pedestal and fetishizing them. When we say in our thousands and our millions, we are all Palestinians, we can and should negate that. Palestinians are all us. We are all human. And the racist Zionist lie that there are no people in Palestine, that it was a land without a people, is wrong. And Palestinians, by existing and showing us what it means to exist in the face of that, certainly they've taught me what it means to be a human, the sheer depth of dignity and courage and samud that humans are capable of. We are all completely changed by this. We will never be the same again.
Beautiful, Frank. Thank you. I mean, finally, if you want to talk about some of the cases that you're involved in, and the significance of these kinds of, you know, I mean, you mentioned the documentation of Palestinian journalists recording their own genocide, the work of human rights, workers like Raji Sourani, who know that it's a Sisyphean task to bring these kinds of cases before courts at this moment, but doing it because that's the thing you have to do. What kind of cases are you working on, and how are they helping to expose Zionism, to expose the West complicity in this depraved genocidal project, and what keeps you going as a lawyer? You know, I mean, it is also a Sisyphean task for lawyers who are on the right side of history.
I mean, I'll take those in reverse order. What keeps me going is, I would say, love. I know that's a cliche, but Che Guevara said something about that, right? You have to be motivated by love, right? And I think you even have to love your enemies, and like that's why I think that we should overthrow imperial capitalism and create a system that's actually premised upon meeting human needs instead of exploiting the vast majority of humanity to create profits for the small number of people who own the means of production. That's the honest answer. I wake up every day and I try and think, hey, how can I meet human needs? How can I stand in awe of my fellow human and try to build a society that's more loving than this hateful murder machine that we seem to be trapped inside? There must be something more hopeful in this. And I think when you think like that, when you're like, well, I hope that we can build something better, because the alternative doesn't bear thinking about, right? Rosa Luxemburg said it in 1915. Think about that. That's 1 year into the First World War, right? The mass murder of working class people with machine guns, the worst barbarity that humanity had seen up until that point. And she said it's socialism or barbarism, and it remains as true today, if not more so, right? So that's what keeps me going. Is like, what's the alternative? You're gonna let the fascists win? You're gonna let Zionism successfully eradicate Palestinians because they're the wrong race? Like, no, I don't want to live in a world where that's allowed to happen. So I'll live and die fighting it. And I'm really fond, recently I've been fond of this expression about dying on the hill, right? Because I've been dragged into regulatory proceedings where I've been forced to try and defend tweets, successfully defended all these tweets that I've done, right? Like criticizing Zionism, saying, look, it's a racist ideology, and if you're a Zionist, you are racist. And obviously a lot of Zionists don't like that. And then this metaphor of defending the hill comes up, right? And it's like, well, the hill's, in the case of those tweets, the hill's not mine to abandon, right? The hill is Palestine. It's like, if you didn't want to talk about the hill, then you shouldn't have. But now that you have to die on the hill. But the point is, like, I'm not actually being asked to die on the hill. I'm lucky enough to live in an extremely peaceful imperial metropole where my life is not in danger the way that Palestinians are. And so I'm fond of saying, I've taken to saying recently, like, the point is not to die on the hill. Like this idea that Palestinians are somehow morbid and they just love death. Like, no, they just love Palestine. They live in Gaza. It's their home and they just love it. They don't want to die on the hill. Like, obviously we all die and one day they will die in their home, but they just want to live on the hill. Like, so I would encourage people not to die on the hill, just live on the hill, but love it so much that you would rather die than leave it. And then again, to negate the in our thousands and our millions, it's like the hill is the planet Earth, man. We all die here. Like, we're all going to die on the hill, but like, why don't we just try and live on the hill together in this much more hopeful way? So that's how I stay hopeful. It's like, we're going to win. The Palestinians are going to win, and humanity is going to win. We're going to overthrow Israel. It's going to collapse, and we're going to replace it with something beautiful, a one state in which Jews and Palestinians and everyone can live together in peace. I really believe that. And we're going to overthrow imperial capitalism. Like, I don't want to live in a world where it's allowed to continue existing. I just think fundamentally we should be more ambitious than to allow this obnoxious system. Like, and again, it's not just so-called Israel, right? It's the entire system of social relations that allowed all these so-called nation states to sit by and participate actively in the mass murder of Palestinians because they're not Jewish. That's disgusting. I don't want to live in a world like that. And then as to the cases I've been working on, maybe I'll just whistle through them. I've got a little list of the ones. I spoke to various clients and said, would you like me to mention these cases? Okay, so I'll be brief. I'll do a little whistle-stop tour, but this is part of what's making me feel hopeful. Going to court on these cases, and our enemies, our opponents, they have no answer to these questions, right? I'm doing a lot of Gaza upgrade appeals, so representing asylum seekers from Gaza. And it seems as though the British Secretary of State is currently granting humanitarian protection, which is a lower form of leave to respond to indiscriminate violence, but she's not granting the higher form of asylum, which is based on persecution, right? So indiscriminate versus discriminate, you understand. And the arguments we're running there are extremely interesting in my opinion, right? What we're basically saying is if the level of violence is indiscriminate, so you've accepted that by granting humanitarian protection, when it's a genocide, it becomes discriminate, right? If the reason you are refusing to discriminate is because you're hostile to the very existence of Palestinians, then everyone in Palestine is entitled to asylum if they want it. So that's one of the arguments we're running. Then I've got this case against Arsenal, which has hit the press recently. So a formidable working class client of mine, Mark Bonnick, is honestly such an honor to represent him, right? A lot of working class people have been sticking their head above the parapet and saying, he said some tweets about, for example, this is all about Jewish supremacy. And he got shoved out of his club, Arsenal, where he'd worked for more than 2 decades. And there's now a massive campaign. And I'd encourage any Gooners watching this, get involved with, Gooners for a Free Palestine, get involved with the campaign, sign the petition, find the crowdfunder if you can and support that. Just find ways to pressure the club to give that man his job back. He did the right thing by criticizing an apartheid regime in a genocide. Then there's a lot of regulatory cases. I won't touch on them individually, but I'm involved in representing solicitors, appealing the decision to be struck off in the High Court, representing barristers, representing nurses, doctors, teachers, basically a growing number of different types of professional who keep getting dragged in front of these regulatory bodies. And like you said, Asa, in some of those cases, the regulators rely on these so-called Zionist experts, and it's just like shooting fish in a barrel. You just say to the regulator, why are you relying on a racist person to bring a prosecution against an allegation of racism? It's just completely ridiculous. A formidable client called Afshan Abu Bakr, her husband was trapped in Gaza during the genocide, and because she was talking about it and reacting to it in the way that you would expect, she was beside herself. Her employer disgracefully saw fit to fire her. It's one of the most egregious instances of unfair dismissal I've ever seen in my decade odd of practice at the bar. I'm also representing Palestinian citizens of Israel who claim asylum. So think about that, right? Israeli passport holders, but who are Palestinian. They are increasingly coming to Britain and claiming asylum. And I'll be brief. I'll wrap up. There's too much to talk about, really. All of my cases are to do with Palestine, but just giving you a whistle-stop tour. There's an amazing case involving Dr. Tawfiq Haddad. Again, I encourage you to Google. There's a Verso blog talking about his case. He's a Palestinian American academic who was working out of East Jerusalem in a colonial era British academic institute called CBRL. And they are trying to say that the Israeli courts, the courts of an apartheid state, should have jurisdiction over that Palestinian man's claim. And we're saying, no, you're based in Britain. There's no basis for the employment tribunal in Britain to endorse the illegal annexation of East Jerusalem. So that's a fascinating case. And then I'm again involved in the prosecution, the attempted prosecution of 10 British people who went to serve in the Zionist military. So I've seen all of the incredible detail. I'm a team of 5 barristers, some of the most formidable barristers I've worked with. And I've been involved with that project from the start. I don't want to overstate my role in it, but I've seen all of the evidence against those 10 people. And it's my hope that if they come back to this country, they will be arrested and charged. I could go on. There's a case against Lloyds Bank on which we're awaiting judgment. I'm representing 2 people at SOAS University who were sabbatical officers that were fired and prevented from taking up their democratically elected positions, in part because of their criticisms of the Zionist entity. And I'm also acting for a growing number of people in the NHS who are bringing actions in the employment tribunal against their employers because they've attempted to organize. So one of my cases involves 2 people whose names have been anonymized, but it's in the press if you Google it. People there's a Guardian case about it, right? People who try to organize a peaceful protest against the Zionist genocide and were met with repression. I would encourage anyone listening to this. Zionism is so weak right now. Speak up. Now is the time to speak up and take risks in support of Palestine. And if you do, there is a growing number of lawyers who will be able to represent you and go into court and say exactly what you've been saying. Zionism is collapsing. You owe it to your conscience to stand up now. It's become a cliche to say, what did you know what you would have done during a genocide because you're doing it now. Just stand up, use what power you can to stand in solidarity with Palestinians against the fascist ideology of Zionism.
100%. Well, Franck Magennis, thank you very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and hopefully we can have you back on again in the near future to maybe talk about some of the results of these cases. You know, there's so much to talk about. There's so much to get updated on. So we really appreciate your, taking time out from your busy schedule to discuss some of these issues with us today. Thank you.
𝐐𝐫 𝐄𝐿, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your work. I feel like getting in trouble just to have you represent me.
No, don't do that.
It would be an honor.
It's been an honor to have you. And yes, like Asa said, please come back and update us on some of these cases. And the fight against Zionism and imperialism continues. Thank you for being.
Thank you so much.
Of that.
𝐶𝐞 𝐄𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿.
Thank you. Oh, that was fantastic.
And put a smile on my face there.
Yeah, totally. It's needed.
Much needed.
Totally.